October 28th, day 28 of Occupy Los Angeles, and you're watching Inside Out News. Today, the occupation here at City Hall in downtown Los Angeles got a visit from the city. The chief of the fire department came down to talk to the organizers about some of the string that is hanging on the trees. They told the organizers that so long as the strings were removed from the trees and that the members of the occupation were kept in check, that is not playing loud music at all hours and keeping the park clean, they would be allowed to stay here for as long as they'd like. One of the city council members, Jose Cuizar, also came by to talk to the occupiers. He resonated a similar message, saying that he believes in the political aspirations of the occupation movement so long as they followed city rules and didn't get out of hand.
What is going on? Because I could support people being out here so long as that message is there. I could support making sure that the rest of the country and the world hears that in Los Angeles, this is going on because of the economy, because corporations are ruling our lives the way they are economically. But if this turns into something else other than that message, I think many of the council members probably have a different opinion. So we've got to continue that message and allow for that message to continue. And that's what I'm hoping happens.
Today we would like to introduce you to two members of the occupation movement. Both have worked in the financial sector over the last 10 years. The first is a man named Pete Totem. He currently volunteers for the Finance Committee and has worked for Goldman Sachs. So you don't think that the fact that people are basically demonstrating against corporations rather than more directly demonstrating against government or the lack of regulation or the deregulation as a result of politicians choosing to peel back certain laws and legislation, you don't think that maybe it's misdirected? Is that your opinion?
A lot of different people here for a variety of reasons. Almost everybody wants Wall Street accountability and transparency. Almost everybody here believes that the banking sector at its core is fundamentally corrupt, and that Obama was a figurehead for banks like Goldman Sachs, was basically put in power to maintain the credibility and the perceived integrity of a system that was on the verge of collapse. Most people here know that the bailout was not about them, but was about the top 1% and about saving the interests, the wealth and capital interests of an elite governing class that has taken control of the entire process. That most people here feel disenfranchised. The unemployment population in the United States, the real unemployment number has gone to, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is now, the U6 number is between 23 and 25%, depending on how you do the math. 1 out of 6 Americans is officially on some form of food stamps or general relief. The SSI numbers, the bankruptcy numbers are going through the roof. And these day-to-day the day-to-day existence and struggle of people in this country and around the world is becoming more and more burdensome and difficult. People are struggling.
What's your solution for this big issue of corporate power influencing all aspects of society? What do you see as the solution that people who are occupying can achieve?
Well, I go back to my earlier comments. In the early 90s, in 2000, 2001 and 2, 2007, 8, you had the Dodd bill, you had Russ Feingold, you had Sarbanes-Oxley, you had all these efforts, basically lip service. The banks drove fundamental policy making. There are 2,500 financial lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and there are only 436 congressional leaders. Sacramento, you see similar numbers. Lobbyists to actual legislators. You've got to take the money out of politics. You've got to take the corporate interests clearly out. They're all bought and paid for. These city council members are in the back pocket of a lot of downtown real estate developers and fat cat banks. There's no denying that. So throughout the country, you need huge, massive systemic change. It's not going to come through the political process, frankly, as we've known it. You need to really reform the way the United States governs itself and exists with the rest of the world. Those are big systemic, deep systemic changes that have to do with property rights. You've got to fundamentally unwind the tax code revisions that have benefited the top 1% over the last 30 years. That means going back to the 1960s when the capital gains tax was 49%, right? Before Bush Jr., it was 25%. He cut it to 15%. It's been at 15% for the last 8 years, 10 years. Whereas the income tax rate for most people is about 25 to 30%. This is fundamentally unfair. And you've seen those numbers those wealth concentration numbers get far worse with the passage of every year. We're now at a situation where we're at 1929 levels. 1% of the country owns 43% of the wealth. And if you talk about financial wealth, stocks and bonds, you're talking about 56% of the wealth. 1% of Americans own 56% of the wealth of the United States, financial wealth of the United States. This is unprecedented.
Our second interview is with Bob Bannock. Bannock is new to the occupation movement but has years of experience in the financial sector and on Wall Street. He gives us a layman's perspective on how the financial crisis was created.
My geography was a couple years in Boston. Then I spent 1992 through 2005 in New York City. And while there, I had offices on Park Avenue, on William Street next to Wall Street. I was in the Woolworth building. And so it was Wall Street neighborhood is actually beyond just downtown and where the stockbrokers are. The big decisions and a lot of the power brokers are actually up on Park Avenue. But yeah, that was my circle. Those are the guys that I hung out with. And I'd have dinner with and parties with our children in Connecticut. And I started seeing some of the dirty underbelly of that. And while my friends and the people that I associate with, I don't believe are connected to any crimes per se, I believe the higher ups, men and they're mainly white men, aged between 50 and 70, 75 now, have committed the most heinous crimes, crimes that would make Bernie Madoff almost seem innocent based upon their size and scope and nature.
Tell us a little bit about the crimes that you've seen or you've suspected of the higher-ups that you speak of engaging in.
Yeah, again, my goal is to try to distill it to layman's terms. And so we look at the housing bubble. And if you didn't have a house and you weren't involved in some sort of mortgage problem, when you start hearing things like mortgage-backed securities and AAA tranches of subordinated debt and credit default swaps, that becomes absolutely meaningless and boring to you. But there were crimes committed by some of the largest companies where they were telling our pension funds, where our teachers and our firemen and our state workers put their retirement money, they were telling these people, buy, buy, buy. And on the back end, they were not just they, meaning the banks. They weren't just selling, but then the casino was open. And they were making bets all over the board. And in 2008, it began to fall apart. And the Ponzi scheme was so big, they ran to their politicians and said, we're too big to fail. So we need to, in a couple of days, craft $1 trillion worth of bailouts. Now, if I go to Las Vegas and I lose a few $1,000s gambling, I would love to be able to lose all that money and know that I could just run to Washington or call a crony and say, I just lost $3,000 gambling, hook me back up, and make the rest of the country pay for it. I actually wouldn't really love that, but none of us can do that unless you work for the big banks and big insurance companies. But that's the real crime. There were crimes committed, securities fraud, in the hundreds of billions and into the trillions. Goldman Sachs, it's estimated, robbed $1.5 trillion from us. And they settled, I believe, for $500 million. So they settled for $500 million. Now, I'm sure there are petty thieves out there. If they stole $100, if they were told, just give back $5, you could keep the rest of it, they'd be thrilled with that deal. And that is ultimately what's happened. But to make it worse, in addition to the stealing of the money, there was then testimony in front of our elected officials where the senior executives of these companies have perjured themselves. And we as a country, we look at the Barry Bonds and the Martha Stewarts, who are public figures, and we've gone after them. And we've said, you've lied in front of Congress, you've perjured yourself, you've committed crimes, and we quickly find ways of taking these celebrities during their fall from grace, and we say, let's put them in jail. But there are people in the last few years who have testified in front of Congress under oath and have lied, and it's been exposed. And we right now are doing next to nothing about it. So that's that first layer of crime, all connected to the housing bubble and financial chicanery among the largest banks, the largest insurance companies, and the people supposedly trying to regulate that and manage it at the Fed and in Washington, D.C. And those people need to be brought to justice. But here is the insult to injury. And this is the thing that gets me, and I'm having trouble sleeping over it. These companies not only got bailed out and stole money, but then their senior executives had the audacity to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation to one another and tens of millions of dollars of compensation to teams of people responsible for these mistakes, for the gambling mistakes. And that fraud, while I don't know if it's criminal, its moral reprehensibility and its disgustingness is the thing that I believe that is going to get the will of the people behind the good politicians who are going to be ready to stand up to this level of crooks.
This weekend, some members of the occupation will be heading over to the Southern Youth Correctional Reception Center and Clinic to protest its closing. The next major event planned for the occupation is November 5th, when members of the occupation will be closing their bank accounts and moving them into credit unions. This ends our broadcast for today. This is Margot Paez signing off for Inside Out News. Good night.